A pile of shame is a collection of games a person has purchased but not played. Mine is substantial. This is PILEDIVER. When I first heard the song Cranes in the Sky by Solange, I felt something emotional, but I couldn't put that feeling to words. The song was beautiful from the first listen, but the lyrics were difficult and opaque to me. So I came back to it every now and again. I sat with it and pulled it apart. I read interviews with Solange on her writing process and matched notes with my own experiences. It's the kind of song I feel I've grown with and appreciated more through the work of trying to understand it. It's worth the effort to unpack. On first blush, Transistor is a lovely game. It's distinctive in its visuals and haunting in its music. It feels foreign and difficult to parse, but its hesitance to give you straight answers feels more like a cover for a game without much to say. It has notable strengths and I'm glad I've played it, but its biggest disappointment is that it's intriguing without being impactful. Transistor tells the story of Red, a singer in the high-tech city of Cloudbank. The game starts in an empty street. Red's lost her voice, but she hears another one coming from nearby, from a translucent green sword embedded in a man's chest. This is the Transistor, your main weapon and your key to understanding the world of Cloudbank as you fight off waves of robots and dig deeper into what brought Red and the sword into these circumstances. The combat starts slow but grows fascinating and complex. Throughout the game, you earn a variety of attacks called functions. You start with just a short-range sword hit and a long-range beam attack, but your arsenal expands to include functions for teleportation, invisibility, explosives, and more. You can only carry 4 active functions at once, but your leftover functions can be used to add certain buffs and passive benefits. Finally, you have a permanent active function called Turn. Turn lets you pause time and plan out a sequence of attacks that are executed in quick succession. In Transistor's tense moments, Turn lets you catch your breath and strategize, but it comes paired with a consequence. Anytime you use Turn, you're locked out from using most other functions until Turn reloads. It gives you brief power, but puts you on the run until you're able to use it again. The wide variety of functions, paired with the flexibility of Turn, creates space for strategy and experimentation, but it's really elevated when Transistor forces you to tweak your approach. See, the game doesn't end when Red runs out of health in combat, at least not immediately. When Red's health drops to 0, it changes course and jumps right back to full, but in return, Red burns out one of her functions. This lets the player continue the fight, but now with a reduced arsenal, forcing a change in strategy on the fly. While Transistor tends to be easy in its early hours, it comes alive most when it pushes back on you and forces you into a corner. Thinking about which functions to bring into battle with me was one thing, but figuring out how to salvage an encounter with only half my arsenal was a much more interesting challenge. And if you find yourself coasting, Transistor gives you a collection of optional limiters that make the game harder in different ways, better setting the player up for the game's most engaging state of play. Switching up how you use your functions also tells you more about the game's world. Each function is mysteriously associated with a Cloudbank citizen. Using a function more fills in pieces of that citizen's story for you to read. This is one of the main ways you learn more about the world, paired with internet news bulletins and your sword, because your sword talks. With Red unable to speak, the sword takes on the role of a conversational narrator. It's through the sword's dialogue that we most learn about the city of Cloudbank and what happened that caused it to evacuate. Every story beat in the game is colored by the Transistor's commentary, and he's written with a distinct, consistent voice. Unfortunately, as a character, I think he's kind of a drag. He speaks with Red conversationally, but since she can't respond, the conversations are one-sided. He comments on every circumstance, every action she takes, but mostly in ways that prioritize being vague and sly over really connecting with her. And worst of all, he talks while I'm trying to read.
3 days this time.
Please don't do that. Kids play this game. What if they come away from it thinking that's okay? The sword might be obnoxious, but that should be fine, right? The trouble is, he's really the only character for most of the game. Red is very much a cipher. You see glimpses of her personality in the way the sword responds to her actions, and she sometimes leaves comments on internet news articles, which, again, I hope kids don't think is okay, But without Red as an active participant in the conversation, it's hard to feel invested in the bond between the two, a bond the game spends a lot of time building. And the rest of the game's world is pretty, but empty. Reading news posts about the city being evacuated could be more impactful, but I never saw another citizen here. Reading people's stories could be involving, but they all seem so removed and isolated. It's all information without meaning, interesting at parts, but nothing that stays with you. Played as a strategy game, Transistor brings some valuable ideas to the table. I'm glad I played it, and I loved it most when its brutality forced me to think in new ways. But there's not a lot here that lingers. Spare the soundtrack, which I may find myself sitting with for a while.